Go. Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you?
Good morning, Frank. How are you? It's been an amazing week. The what should we start with? You notice that so the police are now using facial recognition and DNA engineering to find suspects, and scientists have worked out how two male mice can have their own child, and how two female mice can have their own child. That's in the Guardian today, and then the head of Interpol disappeared in China, and the Wall Street Journal, or was it the Washington Post journalist here, disappeared in the Saudi
Embassy in
consulate
Turkey.
in Istanbul. And I think probably we should start with him, because Khashoggi, if you pronounce it a little differently, and I'm not sure what the origin of it is Khashoggi, which means spooner.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know where his name comes from, because it's not Arabic. Anyway, although he's a Saudi citizen, so I suppose it has to be Arabic in some way, but it's not normal Arabic. Anyway, it seems to me that everything that has to do with organization is running into more and more problems. Nothing that we expect as we think the world is becoming gradually more and more democratic is working the way we think it should, either in the US, or for that matter in a lot of other countries that are equally well known as historically as democracies. What else was I going to say? So of course the stock market crashed as well. We should
No, let's not overlook that either, right?
So science is doing very well.
Let me throw another one in too. Wasn't it in the beginning of this week that the UN climate change data confirmed that the battle is all but lost now against keeping temperatures rising by 7 degrees in the next 60 years or something?
By the end of the century, the world is not going to be livable.
That's correct. That's pretty big news.
It's amazing, and since we don't really see any evidence of it in day-to-day life where we live, one wonders how seriously one should take it. But especially since, as we've said before, the climate has always been changing. So is it really? And we're expecting a new ice age. I mean, the people who study climate change in geology are expecting, think that we're on the verge of a new ice age, and they say we're currently in an interglacial period. So, I mean, it's possible that even if it's true that even if the statement is valid, that we are, because of human effects on the climate, heading towards a temperature rise that could be catastrophic, it's possible that at the same time, the climate change that is programmed outside and has to do with all sorts of other things, like the way the distance of the planet from the sun varies and so on, that may change things. So,
okay,
climate, science, economics, and political organization. But it would look whatever has happened to this man Khashoggi in Istanbul. It's pretty obvious that the people who might be responsible for it didn't understand how much international attention it was going to get, because they didn't realize how much notice has been taken for what he's been writing for some time, several years.
Right.
And it has an international reputation as one of the most interesting people to read about what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised by that because the new Saudi leader, the Crown Prince, has portrayed himself, and I guess I bought into it as pretty savvy about the United States in particular and Western customs and trends. In fact, I think he spent 5 or 6 weeks in the United States last year on a goodwill economic mission. So for him to have missed this so completely, and obviously this must have been sanctioned at his level, for him to have missed this was unfathomable in my mind. I didn't understand it.
It's it's very strange, and it's put the U.S. in a very difficult position because over the past week, people in Washington have been saying what I consider to be ridiculous things about Iran, and the reason which underlies the reasons why the U.S. supports Saudi Arabia, even though Saudi Arabia is so much against Iran. And now, and what is it, a 10 billion arms deal they have with the
Right,
Saudis
right,
that they
right.
don't want to give up because they think that will eventually, in fact, mean giving $10 billion to the Russians or the Chinese,
Hmm.
which they think we need.
Hmm.
So it's going to be very interesting to see how this, whatever happens in the next few weeks, as a result of Khashoggi's disappearance, how it's going to be rationalized in terms of U.S. foreign policy.
Oh, I think we'll see some real mental gymnastics going on. It'll be interesting.
And I saw a headline saying that there'd been a reaction to it in Iran already, but I haven't been able to find any news about exactly what the reaction was.
I don't know either. Okay.
So I mean, it could be lead to very interesting things because it could lead to a crisis in Saudi Arabia, which I think would be the best thing that could happen to Saudi Arabia, force it to reorganize itself in a more, what should I say, in a way that pays more attention to what's going on among the general populace.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, but it's not going to be the crisis. I don't think is going to be prompted by economics. I think it's going to be prompted by isolation and cultural shunning, if I can say that. I think that's what'll do it. And
yeah,
there was an article in the New York Times on the front page today about the Saudi equivalent of Davos that they host, which I think is ongoing at the moment. And this whole disappearance of the journalist has landed like a lead balloon, and people are basically departing early, going home. The international press, the attitude and negativity of them now to this new leader and the regime that they have, which has gone through great pains to portray themselves as sort of like liberating the Saudi society a little bit. I mean, this has all been set back now. It's been erased. It's completely gone. So,
and then since we're now less than a month before the midterms in this country, everybody's preoccupied with trying to work out how all this is going to, how Washington's reaction to any of these things is going to affect the midterms.
well, Trump is going to be on 60 Minutes tonight, and there was a clip that they played yesterday in which he said if we find out that the Saudis were behind I believe he said murder, so he's moved it up to that level of Khashoggi, there'll be severe punishment. He said, but we just don't know. It could have been anybody. It was his usual.
Well, the amazing way Apple is involved in discovering what happened.
Yes, his watch apparently has the most convincing evidence of all. So it's really I understand that assassinations go on that are politically sanctioned, if not ordered, I mean, I'm not that naive to think that they don't, but come on. I mean, to have a man who's such a public critic induced by a pretty high-ranking Saudi official in the king's court, apparently, to come to a consulate in Istanbul where you know there's television surveillance and go into the consulate and not have him come out. I mean, seriously? I mean, didn't they think this through? I just don't understand it.
Well, I think if what appears to have happened actually has happened, it is a symptom of the fact that Saudi Arabia, since the middle of the last century, when it became so closely allied with the U.S. and so heavily supported by the U.S., doesn't really understand its position in the world and has become far too overconfident. The monarchy and now the person who is in fact appears to be in control of the whole government as the representative of the king, thinks that they can do things that they can't. They don't really understand that they're working within a larger global situation, and that their oil economy, even if they can diversify it, which they don't seem to be having much success in trying to do at the moment, is not going to protect them from general international criticism. Mm-hmm. So I think that even though what we've been talking about so far doesn't seem to have very much connection to globalization, in fact, all these things really are going to affect the way globalization is progressing. And it's difficult to see how the combination of things that have happened in the past week are not going to lead to really significant changes in the way the world as a whole is changing in quality over the next few months.
Well, I think you're correct, and with the disappearance of the journalist, I was struck by how quickly and how strong the reaction was internationally from just about all corners about the disappearance supposedly at the hands of the Saudis. And you talk about a globalized kind of response that was grassroots, that really provided a concerted chorus of voices. I was struck by that. I was happy to see that.
And it's interesting to compare what's happened in relation to that disappearance with what's happened in relation to the disappearance of the head of Interpol in China.
Yes, yes.
So China can get away with things, but I don't think Saudi Arabia can.
China is there's a combination of a slight bit more sophistication and a sort of a Bismarckian pragmatism that almost says, okay, what are you going to do about it? So that's very interesting there. And I mean, I'm wondering a little bit how this trade war between the United States and China is going to play out, because clearly what happened in the American economy on Wall Street this week was prompted by fears of a trade war and fears of rising interest rates. And I think that this was preceded by a similar negative drop on the Chinese markets, or certainly in the Chinese economy. And then there were stories that began to circulate that President Xi and President Trump might meet in order to try to cool things off. So again, we're back to the basics. The economy globally is already globalized, if I may. And now what we're basically trying to get over is the cultural acceptance of that fact that has been a fact for quite some time.
So if the Democrats win the midterms and the Saudis run into a particular crisis because of this, and then Brexit, there's a deal in sight for Brexit now. Things are going to look amazingly different. The who's talking to whom, and especially if there's a problem between China and America economically, who's talking to whom is going to be very different in the next few months.
That will be different looking on all of those counts. And I would submit to you, why are they different? Is it perhaps because some of the institutions that exist are in fact working and the voices of people are being heard? And how do you think that change came about or could come about?
Well, I mean, after all, globalization has been driven mainly by continued increasing rates of global urbanization. But the political voices have been America, Europe, and China mainly.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the urbanization is presumably going to continue, but the way those political leaders are relating to each other is going to be very different. And that's going to affect the way the economy works. And obviously, if there is there have been other prophecies recently of another all this journalism about the 10-year anniversary of the 2008 crash.
Oh yes.
That we're heading for another one, and this may accelerate that, which is going to make things look very different.
Things would look very different indeed at that point, that's for sure. What do you think will happen with Brexit? What did you read this morning?
Well, the problem in England is the Brexiteers think what Theresa May is doing is really half in, half out, and they
Mm-hmm.
want completely out.
Mm-hmm.
But the big problem for Theresa May is to have some sort of agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Because with no sort of agreement, England may be out in the North Sea there with no connection to anybody,
Right.
and unable make it impossible for people to get the train from London to Paris or fly from London to different parts of Europe. And having to fly to New York instead of Paris really changes things. There's a desperate need for some sort of normal relationship, and that everybody in her cabinet and in the House of Commons will agree to. And that's really only. It looks now as though she may at least get some sort of recipe for that agreement with the Commission. But whether it will be an agreement that everybody will agree to in Parliament is not so certain.
Well, I still think that they may end up with a revote over there.
Well, that's of course keeps coming up, and most of the comments on it recently have been that it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly a lot of people would be very much against another vote because they think that the people have spoken and we have to do it. But if there was another vote and the idea changed, that would, well, I think it would be fantastic, but it would be a major political, a very unusual sort of political reverse.
Yes, it would be one of those do-overs, which I don't think it's ever happened before in modern institutions in the West like this. It would be as if we replayed the November 2016 election a week after and said, "Oh, wait a minute, we're going to try this again, everybody. Just now that you know what actually happened, let's try it again."
Well, how long have we been having referendums anyway? I mean, referendums is a new idea, isn't it? I mean, I don't know I can't remember now which would have been the first referendum, but I don't think we've had a referendum. There haven't been very many, and the idea of having one is certainly 20th century, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it started in the United States. It started out in California.
Yeah.
I don't think it's binding, though, technically, in the UK. I don't think We've had this discussion. I think theoretically she could walk away from it. She'd end up being very unpopular and lose her premiership. But I think she's technically legally can walk away from it.
Well, it's the great thing about not having a not having a constitution. You can argue about what's possible.
This is true. This is true. All right. Well, Professor, thank you very much. We'll get this paused, and we'll look forward to talking again next week.
Good.
Okay.